Here's a video that I thought I already made, but I didn't, and it's going to have something to do with the lower step being a little taller than the rest of the steps in the stairway, and a couple of ways that you might be able to fix it. So in our example here, we have a stairway that has 7¼ inch risers throughout the entire stairway. However, in this stairway, we don't. We have a lower step that is a little bit taller and at 8¾ inches, where the rest of the stairway will have 7¼ inch risers. And if you do run into a problem like this, it might have something to do with the fact that the original stair builder didn't allow for the thickness of the treads, and that's exactly what happened here in our example. And if you can simply fix this problem here by adding more materials to the bottom. For example, if you have a gravel walkway, you can add more gravel. And if you have any type of concrete walkways, you might be able to remove and replace to correct the situation. However, I don't recommend pouring 1.5 inches of concrete on top of your original concrete walkways. And my next suggestion would be to remove all of the stair stringers, remove everything, and rebuild the stairway correctly. However, with rising lumber prices, this might not be an option, especially in the future when these prices get out of control. So in my next suggestion, I would recommend figuring out the total overall rise of the stairway. And you can do this by simply grabbing a straight edge, maybe a straight 2x4, and then leveling across and then measuring the distance between the top of the upper floor and the lower floor, and then dividing that by the number of risers you have in the stairway. And in order to fix this stairway, we're going to need to add 1/4 inch to each individual riser, taking our original riser height from 7¼ inches to 7½ inches. However, to do that, we're going to need to remove materials from all of the original stringers. And to see if I could make sense out of this a little bit easier, I went ahead and placed the treads at the height they needed to be to create a 7½ inch riser. So these locations represent where we need to have our treads. And like I said, the original mistake for this stairway was the fact that they didn't subtract for the overall thickness of the stair treads. So we're going to need to do that with our stairway. So from the top of the lower level to the top of the stringer, it's going to be 6 inches. Then we're going to add our 1.5 inch thick 2x6 treads and attach them to the top of the stringers to arrive at the correct height. However, before we do that, we're going to need to start by leveling a line at the correct height for our first step. Then from there, we can measure up 7½ inches or whatever your desired riser height is, and then create another level line. So again, take a look at where the treads need to be located, because I'm going to remove those to make it a little easier to understand what we're doing. So again, create a level mark on the first step of your stair stringers, and then you can work your way up and do the same thing on the next step. And then you're simply going to do that for the rest of the steps. Just kind of work your way up the stairway, and then make sure that you double check all of your measurements to make sure that everything was done correctly. And if you are using a ledger and you don't want to cut it because it's going to be a little difficult to cut this piece of lumber, you can go ahead and notch the upper tread around it. So again, you can see where this would be difficult to cut with a circular saw. However, if you were going to take the stairway apart and reuse the stringers, you could always lower this or leave it in place and cut it. This would obviously be easier to cut without the stringers, and since we're working with a deck, there shouldn't be any walls in between there. But if there were, then that would obviously create a problem. And I went ahead and I left the lines here for the original location of the top of the stringers to provide you with an idea of just how much materials we removed. And after you have done that, you can install your treads. And if you didn't move the ledger, you could simply notch over that ledger and fix your stairs. And you might even be able to take the stairway apart, like I mentioned, so that you can cut the ledger. And if that's the path you take, you might be able to lay out one of the stringers and then cut it and double check that all of the measurements are right, and then cut that stringer and use it as a pattern. You're going to lay out one stringer and then double check all of the measurements, make sure that the steps are level, and then use that stringer to mark and lay out the other stringers. And then you can reassemble the stairway. So I will leave that one up to you, and I'm planning on making a few more videos. So the next video I do on this particular topic will probably have something to do with starting with a step that is too low instead of too high.